I woke to the sound of something breathing that wasn't me. At first, I thought it was the recycled wheeze of an air vent, some busted filter groaning in complaint, but then the rhythm synced with my own chest, slightly offbeat, slightly deliberate, like whatever was making it wanted me to notice. I opened my eyes. The ceiling above me was not the cracked plaster of my apartment on Earth. It glowed faintly, shifting from violet to silver, pulsing like skin stretched over veins of light. I sat up too fast and regretted it immediately. The bed, or slab, or whatever it was, reacted by making a low, disapproving hum, like I'd offended its dignity. My hands pressed against a surface that was neither metal nor fabric. Something between. It felt like glass that had learned how to breathe. I snatched my hands back. The hum quieted, smug. The room wasn't empty. Shapes moved near the edges, figures watching from the periphery where the walls curved too wide and too smooth. At first, I couldn't tell how many there were, or even if they were people. Shadows bent wrong, tall and narrow, ears tapering sharp against the glow. Their eyes, too large, too bright, stared openly, as though I were some rare insect in a glass case. One figure stepped forward, the others falling back without a word. She was taller than me, taller than anyone I'd ever met, though not monstrously so. The difference was subtle, the kind that made you stand straighter in unconscious competition. Her hair was black with a shimmer of deep blue, cascading down her shoulders in a way too perfect to be accidental. And then there were her ears. Long, sculpted, sweeping upward like the points of a blade, delicate and sharp at once. She studied me in silence, her eyes a shade that shifted with the light, somewhere between gold and green. Then she spoke. "You will be my pet." Just like that. No preamble. No welcome, no, "Oops, sorry for abducting you." Just that. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but her face was carved in command, unreadable, like marble that had learned to breathe. Behind her, the others chuckled, a ripple of sound that carried more amusement than malice. Apparently, I was hilarious without trying. My throat was dry, my brain screaming 1,000 different things at once: run, fight, scream, pretend this was a dream. Instead, what came out of my mouth was, "Only yours." It was supposed to be sarcasm. Honestly. I meant it as a jab, a little barb to remind her I wasn't about to roll over. But the words hung in the air, heavier than I intended. The crew's laughter sputtered, then twisted into whispers. Her ears, those elegant, blade-like ears, reddened at the tips. A blush, faint but undeniable. Oh no. The silence that followed stretched unbearably long, the kind that makes you want to invent time travel just so you can escape to 2 minutes ago and slap yourself. She blinked once, slowly, then turned her head to the side. Her composure cracked for only a heartbeat, and then she straightened, regal once more. "You will learn your place," she said, but her voice wasn't as steady as before. The others retreated, murmuring amongst themselves, though I caught the way a few of them looked at her, not at me, with faintly amused grins. She ignored them. I wondered if I'd accidentally committed some unspeakable faux pas in alien culture, like proposing marriage during a traffic stop. The room adjusted itself while I sat frozen. The walls pulled back, expanding, until the space was more of a hall than a chamber. Panels lit up with flowing lines of script I couldn't read, symbols dancing across surfaces like streams of water. I felt the subtle thrum beneath my feet, the unmistakable rhythm of a ship's drive core. Wherever I was, it wasn't stationary. The captain, because that's what she had to be, gestured, and the floor responded, forming a path that guided me toward her. I stood, legs unsteady, and followed, because what else do you do when the architecture itself is bossing you around? Her crew flanked the corridor, eyes following me as though I were part of the cargo manifest. I could almost hear their thoughts, fragile, strange, amusing. I grinned back at them, because if there's one thing I know, it's that predators get confused when prey looks like it wants to tell a joke. "So," I said loudly, is there, like, a training manual for this whole pet thing? Do I get a collar, or are we thinking more of a loyalty card situation? 10 treats and the 11th is free. A ripple of laughter spread among the crew again, this time warmer, more genuine. Her ears flushed darker, and I swore she clenched her jaw before snapping something sharp in her own language. The laughter cut off instantly. The silence was back, but this one wasn't heavy, it was protective, almost nervous. She led me into what had to be the command deck. The walls here were taller, the windows, if you could call them that, curved like the inside of a giant's eye, staring out into the velvet black of space. Stars stretched endlessly, specks of white swallowed by colors I'd never seen in any Earth sky. A nebula glowed like bruised glass, swirling in impossible hues of violet and green. She stood at the center, the crew falling into place around her in practiced formation. Then she looked at me again. Not at my face, not at my body, but into me. "Do not mistake humor for freedom," she said softly. "You belong here. To me." I almost said something smart, some retort to cut through the tension, but my mouth went dry. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. The first full day aboard the ship felt less like imprisonment and more like being adopted by an eccentric billionaire family I hadn't asked for. The walls still pulsed faintly when I passed, as though the ship itself were curious about me, but no one explained why. Every door slid open before I touched it, sighing like an overworked butler. At least they didn't lock me in my quarters, not that I could have figured out how to lock a door on this ship anyway. The panels looked more like a puzzle than a control system, glowing symbols shifting every time I blinked. Breakfast, or something pretending to be breakfast, was the first challenge. A panel in my room brightened and projected a shimmering lattice of symbols before producing a steaming dish. It looked like translucent noodles wrapped around glowing beads. I poked it with my finger. The beads blinked back. "Right," I muttered. "Alien oatmeal with an attitude. Fantastic." Hunger won over common sense, so I shoved a forkful into my mouth. It tasted surprisingly normal, like lemony rice. I was almost disappointed it didn't scream on the way down. When I left my room, 2 of her crew were waiting in the corridor. Both had those elongated ears, though theirs were shorter than the captain's. They towered over me, armed and armored, though one of them looked more amused than threatening. They didn't say a word, just gestured for me to follow. The corridors twisted in impossible ways. I'd swear we doubled back 3 times, yet somehow ended up somewhere new each time. The walls shifted color subtly, like the ship was mood-lighting itself. When we finally emerged into a wide common chamber, half the crew was there, lounging, working, or pretending not to stare at me. And staring they were. I felt like the weird transfer student at a new school, except these students probably knew how to vaporize me with a finger. I decided not to give them the satisfaction of silence. "Morning," I said cheerfully. "Or is it night? Do you guys have mornings? Please tell me you don't do the whole Tucson, 26-hour day nonsense. I barely survive Mondays as it is." That earned me some chuckles. A few of the crew glanced at each other, amused but not unkind. One of them even raised a glass in mock salute. Progress. The captain arrived then, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The laughter dimmed like someone had pressed mute. She walked through them like gravity bent around her, her steps measured, her gaze level. When her eyes found me, something sharp flickered there before smoothing into command. She didn't speak to me at first. She addressed her crew, crisp words in that flowing, melodic language of theirs, and they snapped to attention. Then she looked at me again, one brow arched as though daring me to comment. I did. "If this is the part where you tell everyone I'm your pet again, I'd like to request at least a water dish. Maybe a scratching post. Something dignified." Laughter erupted. Actual, full laughter, not the nervous chuckles from before. Several crew members grinned openly at her now, waiting to see how she'd respond. Her ears flushed again, that same betraying crimson along the tips. Her voice, when it came, was ice. Silence. The laughter cut off, but I didn't miss the way a few of them still smirked into their hands. She turned sharply and strode away, and my 2 escorts nudged me to follow. I trailed behind her through another shifting corridor until we entered a chamber that looked like a mix between a library and a control room. Walls lined with floating holographic glyphs, panels alive with shifting data. The hum of the ship was louder here, as though we stood near its heart. She stopped before a vast display of stars, each one marked with symbols I couldn't read. "You think you are clever," she said without turning. "Only when I'm awake," I replied. "I'm insufferable in my sleep." Her shoulders stiffened, but she didn't spin around to scold me. Instead, she let out a slow breath. "You misunderstand your position here. Humor will not shield you. Neither will sulking," I muttered, then louder, "Look, I get it. You're the captain, they're your crew, and well, apparently I'm the ship's emotional support human. Fine. But if you wanted a silent pet, you probably should have picked one that doesn't speak 5 languages badly and cope with stress by making jokes." Finally, she turned. Her eyes were sharp, but not cruel. "You are reckless with words." "Yeah, but it beats screaming in a corner. Besides, admit it, you laughed last night." Her ears twitched. A betrayal. Her lips pressed tighter. I grinned. "See? That twitch means I'm right." She stepped closer, close enough that the glow from the displays haloed her hair. For a moment, I thought she might strike me, but instead she studied me the way she had in the beginning, like something rare she couldn't decide whether to treasure or dissect. "You do not fear me," she said softly. "I do," I answered honestly. "You just don't get to see it. That's mine." Something passed between us then, sharp as static, gone as soon as it came. She straightened, regained her mask of command. "Return him to quarters," she ordered. As my escorts guided me out, I glanced back. She was still there, staring at the stars, but her ears, damn those ears, were still red. I learned 2 things very quickly about alien spaceships. First, they don't like straight lines. The corridors bent, curved, and occasionally doubled back on themselves like some cosmic prankster had designed them after a few too many drinks. Second, they had a bad habit of reminding you that they were alive, or at least aware. Lights dimmed or brightened as I walked, walls shifted hue with my presence, and one door flat out refused to open until I apologized to it. Out loud. So when the entire ship suddenly shuddered, I thought at first it was just another quirk. But the floor didn't stop vibrating, and a low hum rose through the walls, not the smug, "you're leaning on me wrong" hum I'd gotten used to, but something deeper, angrier. Crew sprinted past me, their long coats snapping like banners, their ears sharp and tense. I was shoved against a wall by accident, or maybe intentionally, as they scrambled toward the command deck. My escorts, who had been shadowing me like bodyguards on probation, barked something sharp in their language and motioned for me to stay put. Naturally, I followed them. By the time I stumbled onto the command deck, the whole place looked like someone had kicked over an anthill. Glyphs flared across displays, voices overlapped in sharp tones, and through the massive viewing pane, space was wrong. Imagine a chandelier dropped into a black ocean and shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments. That's what it looked like. Shards of crystalline light, huge as cities, floated in the void, each piece refracting starlight into impossible colors. They shifted slowly, grinding against each other, casting spears of brilliance that sliced across the ship's hull. It was breathtaking. Like standing inside a broken diamond. And then one shard scraped another, and the resulting wave of energy rattled the deck so hard I bit my tongue. "What the hell is that?" I blurted, louder than I meant to. The captain didn't look at me. She stood at the center, barking orders, her posture the kind of rigid calm that only looked effortless if you ignored the whiteness of her knuckles on the console. The crew moved with sharp efficiency, adjusting the ship's course through the shifting crystal field. I edged closer. Okay, so just checking, this isn't the scenic route, right? Because if it is, 0 stars on the travel brochure. A younger crew member near me snorted before catching the captain's glare and snapping back to attention. Another shutter rocked us, lights flickering. Panel sparked. I glanced around, spotted a station where conduits had overloaded. Smoke curled from the circuits. Nobody moved toward it. They were all busy steering us away from the next shard looming far too close. I hesitated for about 2 seconds. Then instinct took over. I darted to the sparking panel, yanked open its casing, and stared at a mess of alien tech that definitely wasn't in any engineering manual from Earth. Still, current was current, and I'd spent enough time fixing broken power grids back home to recognize a failing bypass. "All right, buddy," I muttered to the panel, "let's hope alien electricity still hates being grounded." I stripped a cable with my teeth, probably toxic, probably glowing in the dark later, and rerouted the flow through what looked suspiciously like a stabilizer. The hum steadied. The sparking slowed. The panel flickered, then stabilized, humming more like a smug cat than a dying blender. When I looked up, half the crew was staring. The captain included. "Don't thank me all at once," I said, forcing a grin. "I accept applause, cookies, or one of those glowing noodle dishes as tokens of gratitude." For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then the captain's voice cut through it, calm but sharper than a blade. "My pet has talents." The crew laughed, actual, relieved laughter this time, like they needed the tension to break as much as I did. I should have let it go. I should have smiled and taken the win. But my mouth had other plans. "Still only yours," I said quietly, just loud enough to carry. Her ears betrayed her again, the faintest flush. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't snap. She just turned back to the stars, issuing the next set of commands, though I noticed her hands weren't quite as steady as before. The ship maneuvered through the last of the crystal field with careful precision, scraping by on luck and skill. When the final shard drifted behind us, the tension in the air cracked like a vacuum seal. Crew members sagged into their seats, relief palpable. I leaned back against the now stable panel, sweat trickling down my neck. My heart was pounding, my tongue still tasted like burned copper, but I forced myself to smirk. "So, not the scenic route, then." This time, she almost smiled. Almost. The corners of her lips twitched before she turned away, dismissing me with a flick of her hand. But her ears stayed red for far longer than she probably realized. The ship calmed after the storm of glass. Days, if you could call them days without a sun, slid into a rhythm of humming walls, whispering corridors, and crew members who no longer stared at me like I was some exotic pet fish. Now they stared more like I was a stray dog who'd unexpectedly learned how to fetch. Some even nodded in greeting, a gesture I returned with the kind of awkward smile you give when you're not sure if you're being acknowledged or measured for dinner. One evening, or cycle, or whatever these people called time, I found myself wandering into a wide chamber I hadn't seen before. The ceiling curved high, and the far wall opened into a vast pane of transparent material that looked out into infinity. Stars. Endless stars. Whole rivers of them. Nebulae in violet and emerald. A planet-sized storm of dust glowing faintly as it spun itself into future suns. She was already there. The captain stood with her hands clasped behind her back, shoulders straight as though she were presenting herself for an inspection no one else could see. Her ears twitched slightly when she noticed me, but she didn't turn. I almost left. Almost. But then I thought of the way the crew had begun to laugh more easily around me, and how her ears kept betraying her whenever I spoke. Some part of me couldn't resist pushing just a little more. "Nice screensaver," I said, stepping closer. "Does it come with a music playlist? Maybe something relaxing?" Space whales singing Sinatra. Her lips moved, the faintest tug, though she fought it back down. "You intrude." "I wonder," I corrected, standing beside her now. The stars painted her profile in pale light, her skin almost glowing, her expression unreadable. Big difference. For a moment, silence hung between us. Out there, an entire star ignited, a burst of white brilliance that would have made astronomers on Earth weep. She tilted her head, murmuring something in her own language that sounded more like music than words. "What was that?" I asked. "A birth," she said. "A star just breathed for the first time." "That's poetic. Do you all talk like that, or is it just you?" Her gaze shifted slightly. "You mock." "Always. But mostly because if I don't, I'll realize I'm standing next to an alien captain watching stars explode, and then I'll panic." Her ears twitched again. She didn't laugh, not exactly, but the sound she made was closer to amusement than disapproval. I leaned against the railing, pretending not to notice how the ship adjusted beneath me as if disapproving of my posture. "So, captain of a living spaceship, terrifyingly efficient crew, power over life and death. Do you ever get lonely?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. For a second, I regretted it, but she didn't snap. She was very still, her eyes fixed on the newborn star outside. "Command is solitude," she said finally, voice quiet enough that I had to lean closer to catch it. "One cannot be both commander and companion." "Sounds exhausting," I said. "On Earth, bosses at least get coffee breaks." She turned her head sharply, the faintest arch of her brow betraying curiosity. "Coffee?" I grinned. "Dark liquid that keeps you awake, makes you talk too much, and occasionally ruins your digestive system. Honestly, I think it's Earth's greatest contribution to the galaxy." "Well, that and sarcasm." For the first time, she laughed. Really laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a suppressed twitch. A low, unpolished sound that caught her by surprise as much as me. She pressed a hand to her mouth as though she could force it back, but the glow of her ears betrayed her. I froze, then exaggeratedly bowed. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has a sense of humor. Please alert the nearest historian." "Enough," she said quickly, but her voice lacked its usual steel. "Return to your quarters." "Sure. But just for the record, if you ever need someone to share the loneliness of command with, I charge reasonable rates. Coffee included." Her glare tried to pin me down, but her ears betrayed her again, flushed red against the starlight. When I finally left, the doors sighed shut behind me, and for once, I felt less like a prisoner and more like something else. Not equal. Not free. But not just a pet either. Something in between, suspended like a star about to be born. The first thing I saw of the station was light. Not sunlight, not the gentle glow of a nebula, but hard, artificial light woven into patterns that stretched across a structure too massive for my brain to process all at once. It wasn't just a space station, it was a city braided into a wheel, a cathedral of alloy and energy that spun slowly against the dark. Whole districts rotated around a central core, lights shifting like constellations in motion. The ship shivered as it latched onto docking clamps. The crew stood straighter, uniforms adjusted, their every movement sharpened into ceremony. Even the ship itself seemed to tense, its usual organic size turning crisp, restrained, as though aware it was being watched. She was different too. The captain. Her posture had always been carved from authority, but now it became sculpture, perfect, unyielding, dangerous. The soft flickers of warmth I had glimpsed in private vanished behind the steel mask of command. When she called for me to join her, I thought maybe I'd be introduced politely. Maybe this was the moment I could finally ask what my role actually was. But the look she gave me as I approached, cool, sharp, rehearsed, told me exactly what was coming. The station's main hall opened around us like the inside of a giant seashell, tier upon tier of balconies filled with other captains, merchants, officials, and curious onlookers. Banners of 100 colors rippled from the rafters. Alien voices echoed, overlapping in a dozen languages. And all of them turned to stare when she entered with me at her side. Her hand settled on my shoulder, light, deliberate, branding. The crowd hushed. She didn't raise her voice, didn't need to. "He is mine," she said. The words weren't cruel, but they cut deep. They were declaration and challenge both, thrown into the hall like a blade. I felt the weight of 100 alien gazes press into me. Curiosity, disdain, amusement. To them I was exactly what she said, hers. A pet, an oddity dragged into the light for others to marvel at. And maybe I should have stayed silent. Maybe I should have lowered my head and played along, kept the peace. But something hot and reckless boiled in my chest, and before I could stop myself, I leaned into her grip, tilted my head up toward her, and said, just loud enough to carry. "Only yours." The hall rippled with sound. Not laughter, not jeers, something heavier. Surprise. Unease. A murmur that spread like static across the tiers. Her fingers tightened on my shoulder. For a moment she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then she turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see her ears. Crimson bloomed across the tips, vivid against her pale skin. If silence could suffocate, I'd have been dead right there. The crowd stared not at me but at her, gauging her reaction. A captain should have sneered, brushed it off, tightened the leash. Instead, she hesitated. And that hesitation was louder than any command. Later, when the hall emptied and the banners stopped rippling with the echoes of voices, she dragged me into a side chamber. The doors sealed behind us with a hiss, and the mask cracked. "You undermined me," she snapped, her voice low but trembling at the edges. "Pretty sure I just said you're the only one who gets to call me a pet," I countered. "That's loyalty. Commitment. Exclusive branding rights." Her eyes flashed, but not with anger. Something else, something she didn't want to name. "Do you understand what they think now? What they saw?" I shrugged, though my heart thudded against my ribs. "They saw a guy who doesn't mind belonging to you. Big deal." Her silence was dangerous. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint tremor in her hands. "You should not say such things in public. Because it makes you look weak." Her lips parted, but no sound came. For once, she didn't have an answer ready. The blush on her ears deepened. I grinned, because that was the only weapon I had. "Well, if it makes you feel better, I think they were more shocked you'd put up with me this long. That's the real scandal." To my eternal surprise, her laugh broke free, sharp and sudden, like a crack in the hull. She clamped it down instantly, but the sound lingered in the air between us. She turned away quickly, composing herself, but I saw it. The faintest curve of her lips, the smallest surrender. "Return to the ship," she ordered, voice firm again. But when I walked past her, I caught the tiniest flicker of her gaze, and I knew. For all her authority, for all her masks and declarations, the truth had slipped through. I wasn't just her possession. I was her problem. And she wasn't sure she wanted to solve it. It started with whispers. The kind that curled through corridors like smoke, thin and sharp, carrying the scent of trouble before the fire was visible. Crew members spoke in low tones when they thought I wasn't listening. Names I didn't know, ranks I couldn't follow, but one word repeated often enough for me to understand: challenge. By the time the captain called her officers to the council chamber, the whispers had turned into open murmurs. I wasn't supposed to be there. I knew that. But the guards who usually shadowed me had been called away, and no one stopped me from following the crowd. Curiosity was a terrible habit of mine, and if it ever killed me, at least I'd die knowing what was going on. The chamber was a circle of light and shadow. Holographic stars hung above the table, their slow drift painting the room in shifting constellations. Around the ring stood other captains, commanders of ships like hers, though none carried themselves with the same cold fire. Their uniforms gleamed, their ears tilted high, and their eyes were sharp with the hunger of predators who smelled blood in the water. One of them stepped forward, his voice dripping contempt. "You've grown careless. To bring a human here, parade him like a trophy before the assembly, do you think us blind to weakness?" The captain didn't flinch. "You mistake loyalty for weakness." Another scoffed. "Loyalty? You call that loyalty? The creature mocks you in public. He diminishes your station." I raised my hand like I was back in school. Actually, that's just my personality. Equal opportunity mockery. I diminish everyone." The room went still. A few captains looked at me as though I'd just spat in a temple. My captain's ears twitched, but she didn't silence me. Which was interesting. I took a step forward, heart pounding but words tumbling anyway. "Look, I get it. I'm not exactly the picture of military dignity. But where I come from, laughter is strategy. You ever try cracking a joke while someone's pointing a gun at you? Throws them off every time. I mean, sure, sometimes they shoot anyway, but hey, at least they're confused when they do it." One of the rivals sneered. "This is your defense? A fool with a loud mouth." "Hey," I said, pointing at him, "you forgot, handsome. Write that down." The crew behind me stifled laughter. A dangerous sound in this chamber, but there it was. Even some of the rival captains exchanged looks, unsure if they'd just been insulted or entertained. The captain chose that moment to step closer, her shadow falling over me. Her voice was steady, cool. "He speaks as he chooses. Because he chooses me. That is loyalty. You may mock the method, but you cannot deny the result." The rivals muttered, discontent sharp in the air. One slammed his hand on the table, glyphs scattering in protest. "You gamble with your command. If he falters, if he betrays, your claim will collapse. We will not follow weakness." Before she could respond, I leaned forward. "Funny thing about weakness. On Earth, we've got a saying, never bet against the guy who looks like he doesn't belong. He's usually the one who rewired the life support while you were busy combing your hair." That earned me a few more laughs. Nervous, but real. The captain's gaze cut across the circle, sharp as a blade. "You've seen his defiance. You've seen his loyalty. If you still doubt, test us. But be ready to fail." The silence that followed was electric. The rivals exchanged glances, ears twitching with unspoken calculations. They wouldn't strike here, not yet. But the seed was planted. When the meeting ended, I expected her to drag me aside and scold me until my ears fell off. Instead, she walked in silence until the corridor curved us away from the others. Then she stopped. "You are reckless," she said, low, dangerous. "Yeah," I admitted. "But you didn't stop me." Her eyes burned into mine. "Because you confuse me." That admission landed heavier than any insult. For a second, neither of us moved. The hum of the ship filled the silence, a living heartbeat pressing against us. "Confusion's healthy," I said finally, because jokes were the only life raft I had. "Means your brain's working. Mine's confused all the time, and look how well that turned out." Her ears flushed, crimson creeping up the edges. She looked away, but not before I caught the faintest tremor at the corner of her lips. "Return to your quarters," she said, but her voice lacked its usual iron. As I walked back, escorted again by guards who suddenly remembered their jobs, I couldn't help grinning. Because for the first time, I realized something important. They thought she was in danger of looking weak. But maybe, just maybe, the real danger was how much strength she lost when she let me stand beside her. The alarm wasn't a polite chime or even a blaring siren. It was more like the ship itself woke up screaming. The walls pulsed crimson, the deck vibrated under my feet, and the corridors echoed with a sound that was less danger and more run before we all die. I burst into the command deck just as the crew snapped into motion. Glyphs scrolled faster than I could blink, weapon systems lit up along the displays, and the captain stood at the center like a storm given shape. Her ears tilted back, sharp as blades, her voice cutting through the chaos in orders too fast for me to follow. "What's happening?" I yelled over the din. "Boarding," one of the crew spat as he ran past me, checking a weapon that looked suspiciously like a rifle crossed with a tuning fork. "Boarding?" I repeated, frozen. "As in, bad guys? With guns? On this ship?" The ship jolted violently, nearly throwing me across the deck. The captain braced herself against the console, her gaze flicking toward me just long enough to register that yes, I was still alive, before returning to the tactical display. "Stay in your quarters," she barked. "Yeah, no," I said, steadying myself against the railing. "I've seen the movies. The guy who goes to hide in his quarters is always the first one found in pieces." Her glare could have cut hull plating, but she didn't have time to argue. Another tremor rocked us. Somewhere deep in the ship, metal screamed against metal. Then they came. The invaders burst through the lower hatch like a flood of shadows, armored in plates that glowed faintly at the seams. Their weapons crackled with blue energy, slicing the air in arcs that hissed like angry serpents. The crew clashed with them instantly, the deck filling with light and smoke and the clang of alien steel. I ducked as a beam sizzled past my head and fried the console behind me. My survival instincts screamed at me to find a corner and stay small, but my hands were already moving, grabbing the nearest thing that resembled a weapon, a plasma wrench I'd borrowed from engineering. "Of course," I muttered, hefting it like a baseball bat. "All this advanced alien tech, and I'm fighting with a space wrench. Classic. The first invader didn't expect me." I swung wildly, the wrench connecting with his helmet in a shower of sparks. He staggered, dazed, and I kicked him in the shin because, well, shin kicking works on Earth. He went down with a grunt. Another one charged me, weapon raised. Panic set in. Without thinking, I hurled the wrench like a frisbee. Miraculously, it smacked him in the chest and discharged, sending him tumbling backward into two of his comrades. "Please note," I shouted over the chaos, "this is not my usual fighting style. Normally I prefer screaming and hiding." The crew didn't hear me. Or maybe they did and decided to ignore me, which was fair. The captain, though, she fought like the storm she'd always looked like. Her blade flashed silver against the red warning light, her strike so precise it was like she was cutting music into the air. Every movement was control, command, fury given shape. At one point she glanced at me mid-swing, her expression halfway between exasperation and disbelief as I scrambled for another weapon. I found a sparking conduit cable and swung it like a whip. It cracked across an invader's arm, sizzling. "Yeah," I panted. "Not standard combat training, but I make it work." "Idiot," she hissed, driving her blade into another enemy. "Stay close." That surprised me more than the battle. Not stay back. Not hide. Stay close. So I did. I kept at her side, clumsy and desperate but stubborn enough to make it matter. I blocked one strike with the cable, kicked another in the stomach, shouted nonsense insults that made no sense even to me. "Your armor looks cheap. Your helmet design is compensating for something." And then, slowly, the tide turned. The invaders weren't expecting resistance this fierce. The crew pressed them back, their formation cracking. A final surge of defenders drove them to retreat, their remaining numbers vanishing back through the hatch in a blur of smoke and sparks. The alarms dimmed. The ship exhaled, the crimson lights fading back to pale gold. Silence fell, thick and stunned. Bodies of the fallen lay scattered, crew tending to the wounded. I leaned on the still sparking cable, lungs burning, legs shaking. My entire body screamed that it wanted to collapse. The captain stood beside me, chest heaving with controlled breaths. Blood, not hers, splattered across her arm. She looked at me then, really looked, her eyes fierce but unreadable. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she placed her hand against my chest, just over my pounding heart. "You should have stayed in your quarters," she whispered. I grinned, breathless. Yeah, but then who would have shown off my amazing shin-kicking skills? For a moment, her lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Her ears, traitorous as ever, burned crimson. And in that silence, with smoke still hanging in the air and the ship humming its exhausted relief, I realized something. I wasn't her pet. I was her partner in survival. Even if neither of us knew what to call it yet. The ship smelled like ozone and burnt metal, a scent that clung to every corridor no matter how hard the cleaning drones buzzed and whirred. Repairs had begun almost immediately after the boarding, whole sections of the hull sealed off under containment fields, engineers working until their hands shook. Yet in the middle of all that motion, a strange quiet had settled, as though everyone was afraid to speak too loudly in case the silence shattered. I walked through the ship in a haze, half exhausted, half elated, replaying the battle in my head. Not because I'd been heroic, let's be honest, I was about 2 seconds from peeing myself most of the time, but because I hadn't run. That still amazed me. Normally my survival strategy involved hiding behind something sturdier than myself, like a blast door, or a crew member who actually knew how to swing a sword. But I hadn't. I'd fought. Badly, creatively, chaotically, but fought. The crew looked at me differently now. They didn't bow, didn't suddenly declare me one of them, but the sneers were gone. Some nodded in acknowledgement when I passed, others muttered something that sounded like grudging respect. One even handed me a replacement plasma wrench and said, deadpan, for next time. I carried it like a trophy. Because honestly, I'd earned it. The captain, however, remained unreadable. She threw herself into the aftermath with cold efficiency, directing repairs, issuing orders, inspecting reports. To the casual eye, she was as untouchable as ever, the storm contained. But I noticed the cracks. The way her ears twitched when she saw me. The way her voice softened by a degree when she asked if I was injured. The way she never quite told me to leave her side, even when I was very clearly in the way. It wasn't until 3 days later that she finally summoned me, not to the bridge, not to the War Council, but to her quarters. Her room was surprisingly bare. I'd expected a shrine of trophies or war banners. Instead, there were only books stacked neatly on a low shelf, a faint glow of starlight through the viewing panel, and a single weapon mounted on the wall like a reminder of something she'd left behind. She stood near the panel, silhouetted against the stars. "You disobeyed me," she said without turning. "Yeah," I admitted. "But in my defense, if I had obeyed, I'd probably be dead. And let's be real, I'm way too good-looking to die young." Her ears twitched, betraying the blush that followed. She turned at last, her eyes burning not with anger but with something I couldn't name. "You confused them," she said. "You confused me. They expected you to cower. To weaken me. Instead, she exhaled sharply, as if the words themselves were hard to drag into the air. "You stood beside me." I shrugged, though my chest felt tight. "I told you before, I'm only yours. Even if that means getting smacked in the head with an energy blade." Her gaze flicked away, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure. "You speak as though possession is simple." "Well," I said, stepping closer, "maybe it is. You called me pet. You wanted everyone to think you owned me. And maybe, in some twisted way, you do. But ownership cuts both ways, doesn't it? If I'm yours, then you're mine." The silence stretched between us, alive, heavy. Outside, the stars wheeled past like silent witnesses. Finally, she let out a sound that might have been a laugh, small and broken at the edges. "You are impossible. Yeah, I said softly. But you like that. Her ears flushed crimson again, but this time she didn't turn away. Instead, she stepped closer, her hand finding mine. For all her strength, her grip trembled. You have changed me, she whispered. I thought command meant distance. That to rule was to be untouchable. But now, she shook her head, a fierce smile curling her lips. Now I am stronger because you are here. And I cannot hide it anymore. The lump in my throat made it hard to joke, but I managed. So, does this mean I get a promotion? Maybe from pet to partner? I'll even settle for assistant overlord. That earned me a real laugh, sharp and sudden, filling the room like music. She pressed her forehead briefly against mine, a gesture I didn't fully understand but instinctively returned. When she finally pulled back, her eyes held no confusion, only certainty. Not pet. Not partner. Something else. Something only we will understand. The war wasn't over. The rivals would return, stronger, hungrier, eager to test her again. But in that moment, with her hand in mine and the stars stretched wide before us, I didn't feel like prey or baggage or even a fool with a wrench. I felt like I belonged. And for the first time since being dragged aboard her ship, that was enough.